So I'm going to hand off to our guests of honor today. We're here to celebrate the book release for Foreign Fruit by Katie Goh. I will ask, being held up right now by our inquisitor today. um, uh, Shze-Hui Tjoa is an author of The Story Game, and both books are actually from the wonderful, wonderful publisher Tin House, which is one of my favorite publishers. So I want to hand off now to the two of you and let you take it away. And I'm going to step aside and give you the floor. And thank you so much for joining us.
Mm. Thank you so much, Zach, for doing that little intro. And it's so nice to see everybody. I feel like I recognize some names in the audience. So thank you for spending your Tuesday with us, launching this amazing book. I'm so excited. This book is out. I feel like we should introduce ourselves first, know a little bit, just to say who we are. So Katie, do you want to go first as the star?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and it's really nice to like see some people's faces on camera as well, and to get a sense of like us being in a space together. Also, shout out to my friend from university, Erin, who's in Glasgow at 10 p.m. watching this. Really appreciate that, Erin. But yeah, I am Katie Goh. I'm the author of this book, Foreign Fruit: A Personal History of the Orange. It's my first full-length nonfiction book. I've written a much smaller book before called The End, which is also nonfiction about apocalypses. So if you're interested in that, you can check out The End. But I live in Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm from Northern Ireland originally, and yeah, I've been working as like a freelance journalist and writer for a long time, covering mostly like arts and social things, and working as an editor too. And yeah, this is like my biggest project to date, so I'm really excited to be yeah, sharing it with you all and also launching it in the US. And yeah, it's just so incredible to think of it like going into bookshops there. So this is very special for me. So thank you all so much for being here.
Mm. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll do a little intro. So I'm Shze-Hui Tjoa, and I'm the author of The Story Game. Ah, you can see it here. This memoir that's also from Tin House. So Katie and I are Tin House batchmates. And I'm also the nonfiction editor of Guernica magazine. Represent Guernica. I see IBK, our managing editor, is also here. So yeah, I think that what really draws me to Katie's book is that because we both write memoir, and I think we write slightly different kinds of memoir, but there's also a lot of overlap. And I'm originally from Singapore, so we also share that between us a connection to Southeast Asia. So I think I really connected with this book on so many levels because of that, because we have so many like areas of overlap. So I guess just to start, I feel like to kind of introduce the feeling of the book and the text of the book, it might be nice if you were willing to read something for us, Kitty. I was thinking, so I guess everybody who is on here has come through the website, so you kind of know a little bit about what the book is about. But I thought maybe you could read this section from page 5 to 7, where you talk about the very reason why you started this project in the first place. So, you explain about where the genesis of this project, like what was the reason why you suddenly became interested in the orange as a like obsession that led you to go on a huge journey through so many different countries and also trace the journey of the orange through so many different like intellectual genres, like you look at it as a through the lens of science, through the lens of history, you just like dissect it in so many different ways. Yeah, so maybe if you can read that part for us, it might be good to set the scene for everyone here so they understand.
Yeah, sure can. Is this the part that begins with "I learned there was pleasure"? Is that the one? Yeah. All right, nice. Yeah, so this comes from near the beginning of the book. I learned there was pleasure in writing about pain, like pushing a finger down hard on a yellowing bruise before letting go and watching the numbness bleed back into the skin. I discovered I was good at wielding vulnerability and empowerment. The persona I presented was convenient, the narrative arc neat. I told myself that this was healing. I was taking control of my story. I was writing myself out of the shadows of the 0%. But the more I wrote, the more I ripped at the wounds of the past. There's only so much pain you can exchange for capital until each transaction is violence in itself. By the time I reached my mid-20s, my skin was peeled, and what remained was a bundle of exposed nerves. I no longer knew what was story and what was memory. I had measured my existence in the narratives I could fulfill for other people, and now I feared I had left nothing for myself. The morning after a white man murdered 6 Asian women, I got out of bed and commuted 2 steps to work. I logged on and tried to summon the motivation to answer emails and not refresh pandemic death counts. And then an email jumped into my inbox. Asian hate crimes, read the subject line. I opened it. An editor wanted to know if I could write 800 words on the murders of 6 Asian women by midday. Write it from your perspective, she told me. I stared at the words on the screen for so long that my laptop switched off its display to save power. My reflection stared back at me. Write it from your perspective. I had done that before. I left my laptop and walked into the kitchen, and there, waiting for me, were 5 oranges. As I ate the fruit, I lifted my phone with my free hand and began scrolling through the news again. The families of the murdered women were gathering outside their workplaces, now crime scenes. Their children held each other and wailed. Juice stung my tongue, my gums, my lips. I cut the 3rd orange in one swift movement, from top to bottom, and then ripped the 2 halves apart with my thumbs. My jaw was beginning to ache. I scrolled past statistics and headlines and talking heads who were parsing meaning from the murders. To call it a hate crime or not to call it a hate crime. I opened the email on my phone and looked at the screen that was now sticky from sprayed fruit juice. Write it from your perspective. I could no longer taste the fruit, but I ate until my body was hot and heavy and full. When there were no more oranges left to eat, I slumped back in my chair to reckon with the damage. Each white rind face up to me like a taut knuckle of bone.
Thank you for
That was from the first early part of the book, and just to set like some context of that moment, it was after there was an incident in Atlanta, Georgia, when a man murdered 8 people and 6 of them were Asian women. And the reasons that he gave for murdering them, and the police gave for murdering them, was that he had sort of like a sex addiction or some sort of fetish for Asian women. And it was a time where there was a lot of heightened violence towards people of East Asian heritage during lockdown. So that's just a little context for that moment of the book.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that. I think like so this comes very early in the book. It's like in the prologue before you start on your adventure to trace the orange's path through history. And as soon as I read this passage, when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, okay, I'm already like intrigued and like really gripped by this book because I feel like there's something about how you describe this dynamic, almost like I would call it an extractive dynamic, um, where especially as I think as a woman of color who lives in the West, there's often this kind of like demand that you like juice yourself of your trauma or your pain so that you can offer something of use to other people. And I think like you described that so well, you know, the kind of like instrumentalizing tonality of that email, like 800 words from your perspective, like write it from your perspective by midday. You know, it's like pain is just this product you can sell quickly. And then at the same time though, we are both memoirists. So this is literally like part of the job to choose your life experiences for other people. And then like this the really interesting thing for me is that instead of juicing yourself, you eat the orange. So you put the juice of the orange back into your body. It's you know, you do the opposite of what the editor is commanding you to do. You literally like flip the script and do the opposite. So I wondered like if I could ask you like for the first question, if you could talk about this a little bit, like this dynamic, especially as a memoir writer, where people often have this spoken or unspoken expectation that, you know, they're going to get very close to you and they read the memoir and then they're going to like choose all the pain from your life so that they can heal and get catharsis. I wonder if like when you were writing this book, do you feel like like your philosophy on this issue changed, like about how you use your own pain or collective pain even in the making of
Yeah, I think it's like a really tricky question, and I would love to hear your perspective on it as well as someone who's written memoir. But I think that a lot of the writing that I did when I was beginning in journalism was like opinion pieces or first person sort of essays that were like 800 to 1,000 words, and they were all very like, as a person of Chinese heritage, this is why you should go and watch Crazy Rich Asians, or as a Irish woman, this is why you should support the repeal of the Eighth Amendment that was happening in Ireland at the time, or as a queer person, you should love Queer Eye, things like that, like and sort of like tying things to your identity that are in the news. And I was doing that kind of writing, and it was like I don't regret doing any of that writing because it kind of led me to this book in a way, and also to this point in my life, and it paid my bills. And that's why a lot of people have to do that kind of writing, because it's also what a lot of people want to commission and pay for, who yeah, work at these sorts of like newspapers or magazines. Like it's yeah, it was a way for me to get into journalism. But the more that I did that, it felt like I was almost like segmenting myself. I feel like we're going to use a lot of like orange fruit metaphors to describe things this evening, but yeah, like it was like taking apart my identity and like packaging it up as almost like little parcels to be sold off to like people to enjoy. And I, even though there was like elements of like, you know, I think that what I was giving people was like an authentic version of my identity or myself. It felt very like beginning, middle, end, very like neat and very yeah, like cathartic for people. So whenever I got to like this emo and like the beginning of what happens in the book with eating these oranges, I kind of was like, you know what, I'm like not going to spoiler alert, I don't write the article for this editor. And I actually didn't write very much about that time because I was like, you know, I don't really feel comfortable actually sort of writing about this right now. I feel like I need a new way of writing. And yeah, it was quite strange that it was like the orange that did that for me. And I wanted to find a way of writing about identity that felt more true to how it feels to be a person. And to like, I think this book is actually like the most authentic version of myself that I could present, really. And it's not even the parts that are like the most personal, but it's through like a lot of the metaphorical writing as well, and a lot of like the type of language that I'm using or the style. Like that feels more authentically me than me saying, I'm from this place, I come from these parents, and you know, this is my sexuality and things like that. But yeah, with Foreign Fruit, I wanted to find a way of actually writing about identity that felt more true to how it feels like to be just like a person living in the
Yeah.
world. Like we all have identities, we all come from certain places, but we all know how it sort of feels to like exist as human beings. So the orange became a really useful way of telling those stories as sort of like a hybrid fruit itself.
Yeah. That is so interesting that you said that because that was definitely the sense I got from this book as well as a reader, that part of the part of the journey of the book was that the orange freed you from the way that like society expects you to talk about yourself or like society has certain scripts that people who maybe present as people of color especially are supposed to follow and they talk about themselves, and the orange was almost like a door, like you step through it and then you found another way of articulating. Actually, like, so what you were saying about like making yourself very like presentable and almost like a commercial product through, the earlier type of writing you did before this memoir, it made me think very much of like how your book goes into like the commercialization of the orange as a product. I think especially in the chapter, there's one chapter where you talk about going to Southern California and then you trace like the oranges the kind of the birth of the orange not as a fruit necessarily but as like a product that can be replicated en masse and then sold from California to the whole world. I feel like that is I only just noticed that resonance in the text because of what you said. And I was wondering if we could talk about okay, so I was wondering if we could talk about this part from page 101. I think I wrote it down, but it's from that section, a similar section where you talk about I think this is the part of the book where you're talking about Versailles and you're talking about how like there's in the way we engage with the natural world, there's also this kind of like hidden labor that goes into making the natural world look very neat and presentable and like packaged for human consumption. So it just feels
Mhm.
like a nice thematic jam. I wonder if you could read that section for us.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, that's so interesting, that point there. And I think, yeah, the, I think with the orange, I found it really interesting as like there was once like the wild orange that sort of existed in the world like many, many years ago, and it's been cultivated over time to become the orange that we know today. And I find that like a really interesting idea of like, is the orange that we eat, because it's been so cultivated by scientists to taste in a way that we like and like it's pleasurable to our senses, is that anything, has that any connection to actually like the first wild orange? And I felt like, yeah, I was really interested in like how people who write memoir write about their lives, like they take sort of like the wildness of their life and they kind of turn it into, they cultivate it into um memoir and writing. And yeah, it's just such a funny thing. And it's like yeah, I think if anyone sort of in this call writes about their lives, it's so interesting because it is your life, but it also feels very different to your life. But yeah, I'll read this part that comes sort of midway through the book. And yeah, it's sort of about Versailles and I guess like perfect gardens or perfect nature as well. But the center of the garden's power is the orangerie, where spring blooms eternal. No monarch but Louis XIV had the power and resources to produce the physical attributes of the perpetual springtime, to maintain sumptuous gardens like those at Trianon, able to resist the inevitable succession of the seasons and inevitable decay, writes the botanical historian Elizabeth Hyde. Imported flowers are replaced as soon as their petals show signs of rot. Versailles is less a garden and more an artwork. Flora makes its way inside the palace too. In 1673, 171 bouquets of diverse kinds of flowers from China, crafted from a single roll of silk, appear in the royal inventory. The labor that transforms wild land into gardens goes unseen at Versailles and at royal residencies throughout Europe. Workers disappear when the gardens are to be enjoyed, as though nature is simply magicked into perfection. Cultivation is supposed to bring men closer to God, but really it brings them closer to being God. The shocking poverty of Europe's cities, the distant rumblings of industrialization, the moral dilemma of relying on colonialism and slavery for resources, all this reality is kept unseen, hidden by the high walls of the garden. Outside, the moral landscape is turbulent and wild, but inside, a man can remain in control of his kingdom. Cultivating the natural world is a way to cultivate certainty in faith, faith in self, faith in national agenda, faith in higher purpose.
Thank you for reading that. I feel like, yeah, when I came across this theme, because I feel like this theme comes up not only here when you're talking about Versailles, but as I mentioned in the chapter in Southern California, where I think you even talk about how when the industry in America at that time was industrializing orange production, basically, actually a lot of the labor that went into it was foreign and indigenous labor, but the marketing campaigns purposely expunged all those spaces. And the marketing campaigns showed like basically only white people who like cultivated the orange in a very like kind of like fairy tale like way or like nursery rhyme like way that they just like the orange. But
Yeah,
actually
it's so
the like
funny.
script that goes into the orange is like totally like scrubbed. Yeah. That's like the same theme, right? About like like presenting a much more easily palatable version of how labor produces these things that we take for granted, basically. And I think by the end of the book, it comes back again when you talk about today, like, the book takes us through history and then you land on like the modern day orange and you talk about how I think you mentioned in southern Italy, there are a lot of like migrants, for example, who pick the oranges and they come from like Niger, they come from like Gambia, Ghana, and everywhere. And then in Morocco, so the farm workers were exploited basically to get the oranges that we can pick very easily from the supermarket. And for a lot of people in the global north, including myself, I think when I read all these in your book, I was like, oh, yeah, there's like a lot I don't know about what it takes for this fruit to come to my table. I just like assume that it should be like, why not? Why not? Why should there not be oranges? And yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like
it's like project into existence.
It's like the magic of yeah, exactly. The magic to reduce the wall. Yeah, to reduce the distance and time that it takes to have something traverse such a distance to come to you actually. And I guess I just like the question I have about this is, well, first of all, what was it like to uncover all this when you were writing about it? Like, was it like surprising to you, or did you kind of already suspect this, or was it like something that like changed your own perception of like the fruit industry, for example? And I guess another thing I wanted to ask, but maybe this is like a very big question, is like, what do you feel like there's any way in which writing this book helped you as somebody who lives in the global north to kind of like um to appreciate the orange for what it is rather than like to kind of like feel like you could close this distance between you and the fruit's provenance? Because you've done so much research and you travel around so many different places. So I guess I was just curious about like how writing this book changed your perception of the orange as a material object.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think in some ways it actually like brought me further away from it in some ways because I like learning the history of it. And yeah, so the my book kind of follows the orange's history chronologically and also geographically. So the orange, like the first wild orange, it's a hybrid fruit that people think, like historians sort of and scientists think that it began sort of Western China, like the Tibetan Plateau, Northern India, like that area of the world, like thousands and thousands of years ago. And then it came into China and also moved into different like Southeast Asian countries and then went across the Silk Roads and was taken over there by um like, people selling their goods and things like that. And it eventually arrived in Europe where it was sort of became this symbol almost of like luxury and sort of foreignness that was coveted by like kings and emperors. So like that passage that I just read was sort of looking at that period of the oranges journey. And then it went off again and became a tool of empire because European sailors, when they were discovering, in quotes, new lands, they had to eat citrus because otherwise they would get scurvy and they wouldn't make it. So around lots of like different places, including like West Africa, there are all of these old groves of citrus because the sailors would stop at these sort of like almost like clinics or something where they would like pick up more oranges and like get their dose back up and then keep going over to America, and then oranges were brought over to the States and South America as well, and that became a big industry and a reason why places like Florida and California sort of kind of boomed in the 19th, 20th centuries. And learning all of this history, I was like, wow, like this fruit has been on a real journey. And I think it made me like, I think in terms of my relation to the orange, it made me just sort of look at it a bit differently, where I was sort of like, I would eat a lot of oranges when I was writing because it's really, it was useful to sort of like, I need to describe the flavor. And I would have it on my desk and I would look at it and I'd be like, what even are you? Where have you come from? And I think like that, it was really fun to research it and to be able to tell so many different stories through the orange. And then also the more modern ones about, the orange's role with, yeah, people laboring and especially migrants laboring in Europe and not being paid the wage that they should be paid and living in very precarious situations, and how the orange is sort of like used as a political um, tool a lot of the time with different countries. It Yeah, it made me think a lot about my relationship to like food and to nature and land a lot, and trees and things like that, and things that, food I feel like is so disconnected from nature. Like we think of food as like completely different. And as someone who tried to grow a lot of vegetables during lockdown, let me tell you, it takes like a lot of effort to make a couple of carrots. So I have a lot of respect for people who do that work. And I think that, yeah, I hope like the book kind of makes people sort of like think about that as well as like the bigger, like those big like issues around identity. I really hope it just makes people look at things a little bit differently. Like, where has all this stuff come from? Like, who's making this stuff? What labor went into this? What are like the chains that have like led this thing to come towards me, the consumer? Um, and like I'm absolutely like a hypocrite, like, I'm buying oranges when they're not in season and things. But I hope that it just makes us sort of like look around and think like, yeah, like how has this kind of got here? Like, what are the systems in place that are doing this? And like who is suffering for my benefit of getting to enjoy fruit all year round as if it was like Versailles?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, well, it definitely changed. I think reading the book changed it for me, like my perception of the orange. I think especially like the chapter where you're in when you're in in California and then you're walking through like hundreds of different variants of oranges and the way you describe each orange with such precision. I think you say like like you describe the different subgenres of orange. And each one tastes slightly different from the other. I think that was such a, for me as a reader, that was such a beautiful moment in the book where I was like, oh, I see that, like, you know, like there's like a kind of sensory richness to this fruit that comes across in your writing. And it helped me to appreciate that there was like a whole world of the senses connected to this item. Um, so just basically because of what you were saying, I was wondering if you could read a section from page 44 to 45 where you're talking. I know we're jumping around the book a little bit, but this is the part where you're talking about the Silk Road and kind of the orange's journey on the Silk Road. I just love this part of the book because it's a reconstruction of the Western market of Chang'an, I think. And I just would love you to read it so everybody can hear like the style in which you wrote it and the
Yeah,
detail.
I think
I
this
get
is like
every detail.
I feel like yeah, the structure of this conversation as well kind of it feels quite right for like this book because and like the orange because of like the segments and things like there are so many different like aspects of the book because it does move around quite a lot geographically and in time as well. So it feels right that we're also doing that and like in keeping with the spirit of the book almost. Um yeah, I will read from this is like quite early on in the book and yeah, as you were saying, it's set in Chang'an's Western market. A breeze rises, and with it comes fistfuls of petals shaken loose from magnolia trees. Pink confetti scatters over the recently executed who rot and hang from the walls. The dead watch over the living as Chang'an shoppers file out of the market gates to the beating of a drum that brings the day's trading to a close. The final strike is delivered and fades along the market's empty lanes. The young drummer slips through the closing gates and becomes one more face, lost in a crowd of thousands. The sun is setting on the 7th century. In a millennium, historians will proclaim that this moment was the golden age of imperial China. But right now, it is time to leave. Chang'an is the world's marketplace, where the Silk Roads begin and end, and where they begin anew. It is the gate through which China's produce leaves, loaded onto carts and animals, checked by market officials, and delivered to the world. And it is a symposium for ambition and appetite that turns on an axis of life and death, where criminals are put to death and merchants deliver new commerce, new ideas, and new gods. In the morning, visiting merchants will depart the city in caravans and take with them Chinese goods, which will transform from local to foreign as they move along the western roads, farther and farther away from where they came from. Bolts of silks, scrolls of paper, dried and fresh fruit and fish, robust jade and fragile porcelain, gourd bottles containing greasy medicines, and miscellaneous misshapen ironwork and goldware. But before the exportation can commence, there is one last night to spend in the cosmopolitan city. On a single street in Chang'an's western quarter, overhead, the sky, splashed with the gold and crimson of dusk, is framed by the ornate eaves of a Turkic prince's mansion that is glimpsed between the wooden beams of a brothel, that is glimpsed between the stone vaults of a tax office, that is glimpsed between the sanctimonious shrines of a noble family. Underfoot, pigs dragged by fraying ropes, looped twice around the neck, gangs of skinny barefoot children, grasping rusted blades and running along grey paths, the grey of dirt, of dust, of people making a life for themselves within a city's walls. On the horizon, Buddhist monasteries and Taoist pagodas looming over taverns, the blossom from the imperial gardens peony and magnolia trees raining down in spring showers. Inside, rice wine sloshed from clutched cups, men's souls stuck to worn floors, and the melodies of instruments carved from gourd and bamboo reverberating from room to room.
Thank you. Yeah, that was just like so beautiful. I think that um Yeah, exactly. It's so detailed. Yeah. Because I think when I read your book, not only in this scene, but throughout the book, I think it's a recurring thing that like you often describe historical scenes, but you reconstruct it in a way where it feels like I'm there in the scene with, with you, I guess, as my guide. And you show how the people who would have been living through that atmosphere would have reacted to the sensory stimuli around them. And sometimes it's really beautiful and rich, like in the scene. But I mean, in some cases, it's also you use it to like the opposite effect, where it's really like harrowing. So I remember like at one point in the book, you're describing like this massacre that takes place in Los Angeles of like 66 Chinese immigrants. And that was so harrowing for me to read because you bring that same level of detail and like perceptiveness and acuity to that scene as well, and you reconstruct it in a way where it's not just like a dead historical fact or like kind of like these objects are just like in a museum, when you walk around and you just see, okay, I understand. Like I felt like I understood it not only intellectually but in my body when I read it, this whole text. So I guess my question for you is because I think that quite a lot of people who are watching are probably writers also. And when you did this kind of historical reconstruction throughout the book, like what was your process like? Like how many hours of research did it take to write this scene that you just read, for example? And also like what was your favorite one to reconstruct and what was the hardest for you?
Mm. I really like doing like that passage I just read out because I felt like it really like let myself go with that one. It's like maybe I was like flourishing too much, but it was really fun to write. Um, yeah, I think like the process was just like a lot of research and reading a lot of history books and a lot of things that like weren't really like necessarily relevant to the oranges story, but say I like I wanted to write about the orange in China before it would leave to go onto the Silk Road. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to write about that, I need to go away and read a lot of books on like the Tang Dynasty, like 7th century China, and like learn what a city was like or like, who was living there. So like everything that's in that passage, like factually, like I read in a book. And then other things I sort of like, the idea of like the pigs would be led by frayed rope. I kind of like was assuming that that's probably true. So I think like I think it's really difficult with like creative nonfiction because you always want to be true to like the facts, especially with history and science, but you also are aware that someone is reading the book as like like you want to like create a narrative that someone's going to enjoy. um and you don't want to, like people could just go and read a history book about Chang'an, or they could go and like read a textbook about oranges. So but I'm like trying to infuse like creativity into it, so it was like quite difficult to get that balance. But I think just finding like those little facts to hold on to, actually it began to like paint a picture in my mind of like, oh, there were, I read in a book that there were like magnolia and peony trees in this place. And I was like, well, the petals are going to fall and that's going to be very beautiful. Like I walk through Edinburgh, like where I live, whenever all the blossom is out, and how it falls and how that feels, and how when the blossom falls, it like becomes really horrible on the ground, actually, like when it starts to rot and it sort of smells really weird. And I think I wanted to create that sort of like central detail of things, like no one who's alive has been to this marketplace in the 7th century. We have no idea what it was like, but we know what it's like to walk through a really busy street and to be sort of overwhelmed by loads of like sights on the horizon, and you're trying to like glimpse things through things, and the crowd's really busy and it's a bit too hot and like things like that. So I was trying to recreate like that kind of like feeling, I guess, through the writing. But like in terms of like, the brothels and the eaves and the prince's mansion, like all of those things I found in books and sort of tried to weave together. I think it was, yeah, just trying to find the right stuff to include, and also not to like I found it hard to actually take stuff out as well, where it was like, oh, like we don't need that much detail about every single thing. But yeah, it was so fun to write, and I got a lot of like I don't write fiction, but I get a lot of inspiration from novel writers and reading like how you set a scene and how you use dialogue and how you sort of bring people into a moment as
Yeah.
like an influence, which is really helpful. But yeah, I also think with the book is sort of narratively, there's like stuff about me sort of like I guess, in like the present moment, and then things are happening in the historical narrative, like when you go back in time, and all the stuff
Yeah.
that's in the all the stuff that's set in like the history, like that's all in present tense, and all of the stuff that's about me in like the present moment is in the past tense. And I did that really deliberately to try to like bring these two sort of times together, and sort of let history kind of echo with the more modern stuff and the more contemporary ideas, and let the things kind of like, hopefully without having to like hold the reader's hand too much, just be able to like let things like resonate with each other. Like I write about the Black Death, and I also write about lockdown, the pandemic, and hopefully people are able to just like make those connections on their own without me having to like, do too much hand holding. But the history stuff was so fun, as someone who's like, not a historian or anything, but just loves like learning more about different moments of time. It was just really fun to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think you can see it in the text. You can see that like you had fun with it. And that's also like what you said, I think it makes total sense that you get a lot of inspiration from fiction, because like what you did is essentially build a world. And that's what fiction writers are doing, right? They're doing world building all the time. And I think there are a lot of pockets in the text where I can see you like creating a world out of these objects that you've like sourced from maybe different books, and also from your own experiences of journeying through so many countries. So I guess the next question I have is like a little bit related to that, because you said like you struggle to take things out also. And I feel like I just have a very like prosaic kind of like craft question maybe about like when you were actually moving through the world. So for example, quite a lot of your book is set in Malaysia. You talk about going to KL, Kuala Lumpur, and then you also talk about going to Ipoh. And I just have this question about like when you were in the moment as a travel writer, like having these
Mm.
dialogues with people, like, you're actually conversing with people, you're going with your auntie to like a fruit farm to get fruits, and like things are happening all around you. How did you like how did you like document what was going on without like exiting the flow of like
Mm.
conversation and everything around you? I guess I just wonder, because this is a book that contains so much like you're just doing and seeing so much. And I guess because one way that your book can be read is as a travel memoir, right? In some way, because you're physically traveling to follow the orange. And I guess I just wonder about your process in that sense. Like, how did you make
Mm.
sure you didn't lose things as you were going, or you didn't get so distracted? Because I think if it was me, and this is a problem I struggle with as a memoir writer, I get very distracted when I move through the world because it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that, I there was only, I think, 3 trips that I took during the writing of the book that I was aware that it would be turned into a book. So there was like one of the trips to Vienna, one of the trips to KL, and one of the trip to California. Those were all very like specific journeys I went on to like capture something for the book. But the rest of it, at the time that the sort of narratives take place, I wasn't really thinking of writing a book. But I think that I was able to capture a lot of like this sort of like maybe like the spirits of places, or just like my perspective on places, just because I've like been to them a lot of times. So places like KL and Ipoh are places I've visited since I was a child. So like my memories of them are so strong that I almost didn't need to look at that many pictures or look at old diaries and things like that, because it was just like it was able to like be there immediately. Um, I think that when I was on the trips where I was aware that I'd be turning into a book, I'm quite used to doing that as a journalist, like doing reporting, especially when it comes to doing interviews for like to write profiles. I think actually like what I find like that skill of being able to do an interview with someone and turn it into a profile, I find was the most like transferable skill almost with this book. So like if you're interviewing someone, like if I'm interviewing you, I will then go away and like write a profile up, and I'll like it will all be stuff that you've said, but I'm framing it in certain ways, or I'm like pulling certain bits out, or like rearranging the conversation a little bit to be like, oh, that thought that you had makes more sense above this other thought, but it kind of like, even though it came later, I'm going to move it up here, and like sort of playing a little bit. I find like that was probably the most useful thing when it came to writing about different places and things like that, and like trying to draw from real life, where I would be like, yeah, everything that's in the book happened, but I'm sort of just like, I am writing a book and I'm creating a narrative. I'm like moving things around and I'm like, yeah, like trying to capture a place or a person or a moment in like their essence. And I think when you're trying to, if you're doing an interview of someone, you're trying to do the same thing. Or if you're like reviewing a concert or a play and trying to like capture the essence of something. So I felt like those skills that I kind of like used a lot as a journalist were really useful there. I didn't record any, I don't think I recorded any of the conversations I had with anyone in terms of like taping them. I think it would have turned it too much into like an interview that isn't kind of like the what I wanted to capture with this book. I think I like wrote like things down what people said in like my notebook and things like that. But I really tried to like just let things sort of happen and hope that, you know, I would be able to capture them. So I did a lot of like scribbling after meeting people and doing certain things.
I love that you felt like you had the freedom to do that. Because I think as I'm listening to you, I realized that like it sounds like you gave yourself a lot of permission to imaginatively reconstruct the things that you had experienced. And for me, like, first of all, I like really respect that as a memoirist because that's like a huge, like, a hugely assertive way, I think, to approach memoir writing. And also, like, that's so in line with the spirit of your book because in your book, you talk about like the beauty of the hybrid thing. Like, just because
Mm.
something has been hybridized or it's no longer like authentic anymore doesn't mean it has less value, right? And this is exactly what you're describing with your process. That just because you have a little bit of imaginative distance from the thing as it actually happened, doesn't mean that it's lesser. Yeah, I mean, I think that that must be so freeing in terms of like your creative process.
Yeah,
I
it's so freeing. And like, especially after like, because as a journalist, it's like the last thing you want to do. So it's just so nice to be able to be like, oh, this is like a narrative and it's creative and you can have fun with it. And you obviously want to still like capture the like facts of it, but you can also just enjoy writing it as well. It's so fun.
yeah, that's wonderful. I wonder if like because I think we will maybe in a little while I will open up for audience questions, but I wonder if we could just end by you reading this last part that's about this. It's from page 82 and 83, where you talk about the beauty of the hybridized thing. I think you talk
Mm.
about this like from the part where you talk about the painted cinesapple and
Mm.
then just until like something new and hybrid and delightful is created.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Like the painted cinesapples in a still life, silks, lacquered furniture, and porcelain in European households are fashionable for what they signify, the exotic. Chinoiserie is a European interpretation, an appropriation of Chinese aesthetics made palatable for Western tastes. It is a hybrid aesthetic, a crude creation of China through a European gaze. The reinterpretation of other cultures is not one way. In Beijing, the Emperor Changlong commissions Jesuit artists to design 18th century Baroque-style European pavilions in Yuanming, Yuan, the city's summer palace. Authenticity is priced high in culture. We want authentic food, authentic travel, and authentic experiences. Authentic may as well be synonymous with real. But authenticity is a nebulous quality. As the Silk Roads taught us, societies have been exchanging food, ideas, religions, and genetics for thousands of years. I wonder when an inauthentic creation becomes a style in its own right. When does Dutch porcelain, with its Chinese motifs, assimilate into the history of art, not as a cheap version of East Asian ceramics, but as its own hybrid visual identity? Immigration is the hybridization of multiple cultures, as is the mixing of families of different races, nations, and religions. My father using the leftover trimmings of a roast dinner in his Malaysian curries is perfectly inauthentic and perfectly delicious. Immigrants who open restaurants of their national cuisines often transform their cooking to cater to Western palates. Chinese, Indian, and Thai takeout restaurants may not be authentic, but in their inauthenticity, something new and hybrid and delightful is created. And I'm going to skip forward a little bit to finish the reading. But the world is made of hybrids. Purity is an illusion. We are born of two parents. Even the orange is the offspring of different parents, the mandarin and the pomelo. Art has always taken its inspiration from numerous wells of ideas. A still life is a construction, half of imagination, half of reality. A contemporary ceramicist shapes their porcelain after both Chinese and Dutch models. History is too various to offer a single narrative. Life is composed of shards of glass, all slotted together to make a mosaic. No one is born complete.
That's just, I think that's perfect. That's like the encapsulation of the spirit of the book, or the part of the spirit of the book that moved me. I didn't realize it when I read it, like myself, but when you read it with your voice, like this line, half of imagination, half of reality. I think that's exactly what is so special about your book, that you have the freedom to do that. Not only in the way you talk about the orange and the way you bring us through its history, but also the way you talk about yourself, kind of. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think like that's kind of yeah, that idea of like when we like bring the like if we go back to identity, like half of like yeah, it's like we are almost like imagining our identities as well as them being real things. So like,
Yeah.
I'm like half Chinese Malaysian and I'm sort of that is real, but I also have like an imagine like what that means to me and sort of imagining what that was when I was growing up and like what that represented and what it symbolized to me was like being different or standing out and being not a negative or a positive thing even. It was just something that was like in my own head and I had my own version of that identity that is different to how someone else would have viewed me. So I think that yeah, like that sort of like half like one thing, half the other thing, like that hybridity and that sort of like inauthenticity. I'm just so interested in that because that feels so true to like how we even just like think of ourselves as people, like and our identities.
100%. And probably that imaginative part, where you have a little bit of freedom to retell or tell and retell your story, is where we can meet each other, because
Mhm.
we're always trying to meet that real thing of the real thing. There's no like in between space where there can be an overlap. So
Yeah,
that
and I also think like what even is what we think of as real is very political or very like depending on who's describing what is real. Like there is no like realness, like that in itself doesn't exist. So I think that if you're born with different obvious like cultures or like races or religions or genders or sexualities that you don't fit into like one category, then you don't feel very real because you're like, well, if you have to fit into a certain category to be a person in my society, then what happens if you don't fit into that? You're kind of having to like imagine a whole new way of being. And that can be a really scary thing, but it also can be like a very liberating thing of being like, okay, I can like make myself up. Like that's really exciting as well.
yeah, yeah, amazing. Okay. Okay, we're gonna run out of time soon. So I'm just gonna open the floor for questions. So if anybody has a question, you could either type it in the chat and then I can read it out and Katie can answer it. Or I guess if it's possible for you to unmute yourself, you could also do that. But yeah, just um if not, I can ask a question. Oh, okay. There's a question in the chat. Where do you find most of your inspiration to write?
Mm. I think normally when I'm like just like trying to figure something out is when I like to write about it. Like with this book, it was like I was trying to figure out a way of writing about identity or like even just thinking about identity in a way that I was like, oh, I'm kind of bored of just thinking of things in like strict binaries or categories or having to like put a pin in your identity and just like, be sort of defined by that. I think with this book, I was like, okay, like how can I find new ways of describing how it feels to have my identities or to like just exist in the world or like what new like experimental ways can I play with that idea. So I think that when I'm trying to find inspiration to write, it's mostly just like something that I'm kind of curious about or a question I have that I can't find the answers to or something where I'm just like, I don't really understand this thing. Let me like write many hundreds of words about it to try to figure out um I guess how I feel about it. And it's not about coming to like a conclusion because I think that this book has like no conclusions about like me suddenly feeling like a sense of belonging or like, oh, I found my identity or anything like that. I think actually I very purposely didn't want to do that with this book because I feel like a lot of like expectations around these sorts of memoirs that are focused on identity, especially by, people of color, like LGBTQ plus people, it's like there needs to be like an ending that is like, and then I find myself, or like I find my people, I find my like sense of self in the world. And like that's really cool if that's real. But I was like, well, that doesn't feel quite authentic to like how it feels to be a person who has to like keep living after like the last page gets written. So yeah, I think that to answer your question, I think just like things that I'm curious about is probably the answer to that one.
Thank you. Okay, we have two more questions. I'll just go as they appeared. One from Chloe, who asks, Katie, do you have any other favorite memoirists who inspired your choice of this hybrid research memoir format? So, like book recommendations.
Recommendations. I'm always so bad at doing this on the spot. I feel like after I, I'm trying to like recommend things, I think of like 100 books afterwards. I mean, I finished your memoir on the train at the weekend, and I didn't read it obviously to like be inspired to write Foreign Fruit because I just finished reading it, but it was like so incredible. Like if you haven't read the story game, like please seek it out. Like I've never read anything like that. Like how you play with form is like incredible. I was so moved by it. But I think I've been reading a lot of like Annie Ernaux recently, and like read her over the last couple of years when like everyone else discovered her as well. She wrote a book called The Years, um, that I think has been really important to like how I think about life writing and sort of has like felt like it's freed me up a lot of the way. Like Annie Ernaux kind of just writes about her life, but in a way that is sort of like you're not really quite sure if it's like autofiction or fiction memoir. It kind of like subverts every like expectation of genre, which I really love any book that does that. And she writes in The Years like the story of her life, but she uses this like collective we voice, like a chorus almost. And I thought it was so beautiful how she writes about like huge moments in France's history, like, really big, like if you read like the Wikipedia page of like those years will be there, but then also pairs them with like these small intimate moments of her own life and like women's lives around her, and like sort of the epic or the like historically grand is on the same like level. It's like the same, it's like pure like equality. It's the same level as like her, having sex for the first time or leaving home or like her mother passing away or things like that. And I think that's so, yeah, wonderful to like to be able to like write about your own life but also to write about the world around you, and like for the writing to like swim between the two things where there is no separation of like this is me, this is the outside world. Like I'm always really interested in people who are very like open and like aware that they are just like one tiny piece of everything that's happening around us. So I
Mhm.
think that's kind of like a hybrid memoir, maybe in like that sort of personal narrative history, kind of like working together. But I really recommend Annie Ernaux's books if you haven't read them. But I'm sure you probably have because they're very famous and well known and well respected.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's like the balance between the self and the world. I think to write a memoir that can achieve both is it's like that. That's it. You've done that and you got it. Okay, wait. There's one other question from Haja. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. What kind of transformative journey does the book delineate, both metaphorically with the orange and realistically with the person behind the orange? So I guess like what was the transformative journey for you in writing this book, if there was one, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the transformative journey of like the orange is like the subject of the book is just was for me to sort of I guess try to like tell its story in terms of like where it sort of encountered different moments of time that sort of are meaningful to me or sort of stood out to me, like how its meaning has changed as it moved across the world, and it's being able to like transform itself like time and time again and be transformed by people and cultivated, and how something that is like quite objective, I guess. Like it's an object that is just sort of like sitting there. It's like a fruit that grew and it doesn't really have that much agency over where it could move. It sort of became this incredible fruit that has like, you know, seen human civilizations like across the world sort of fall and like come back, and it's been a part of that journey, and it's also sort of watched and witnessed that. I thought that was like a really like what transformation it's seen and been a part of. I was really interested in trying to capture that in this book. And then I think for me, like the transformative thing is, I guess I started the book being like how like it just felt like it was really weird to be a person in the world, and like I felt like history was very overwhelming. Like I think the like just every sort of choice that it feels like has been made by people in the past, and like history, it just sort of feels like that we just have to live with that right now, and we're kind of suffering from the choices that people have made in the past, and like all these horrible things like racism and sexism and, you know, xenophobia. Like we can't get past that because of things that have happened in the past. And I kind of, by making the past speak to the present, I wanted to like, yeah, just like sort of show how we do have agency and we have to learn from things that have happened in the past, and like because things do sort of repeat over and over and over again. And I was really interested in like, instead of the past being this like foreign land, if you like, or like at an arm's reach away, I wanted to really like force myself to like explore that and kind of dive into like moments in history that I'm quite like almost like afraid of going there, like with like things like colonialism and things like the massacre that you referenced earlier. Like those were hard things to learn and read about, but I think it's really important that we always like we remember those things. It's really important to like, you know, memorialize those bad things that have happened as well. And I think I came out of that process just being like so like more curious about the world, which is like really nice to like I think I started quite cynical, and I came out being like, those are only like a few things that I managed to like research for the book. Like there's so many other things out there. And it made me sort of, I feel like this book kind of closed a chapter on the sort of writing that I've been doing around identity, and trying to like first of all do those sort of pieces of writing and then push back against those pieces of writing, and then sort of be like, oh, I feel so unsure of like my writing being a commodity, and like, you know, all of these things, turning myself into the pages in a book. Whereas I feel like this book kind of like it's almost freed me from those sort of questions. And I'm kind of like, okay, if I'm not always thinking about my own like identity and having to like, you know, present myself in that way to people, what else can I like free to do? And I that doesn't mean I don't want to still write about identity. It just means that I think I've like opened up a whole new world of like potential things to like journeys to go on, which is lovely.
Yeah, curiosity is the opposite of commodification. Yeah, that's what I think when I hear you say that. Okay, I think we are probably at time, but thank you for this conversation. I feel like I learned so much, and I also, yeah, it was just so marvelous to hear you like in your own voice talk through your book and read from your book. Yeah, that's
Oh,
just
thank you so much. Thank you for your beautiful questions, and thank you everyone else for coming along. Like it really means a lot to, yeah, have you here. So thank you so much.
oh, thank you, and thank you for hosting us at the writer's house. So.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful chat. And to our audience, we hope you'll join us again soon. And if you want to see this again, we'll be posting the video on our YouTube channel here in the near future. You can find the link to that through our website. Thank you all so much for coming out, and to those of you who it's actually getting a little late, thank you for staying up with us, and have a good night.
Okay. Thanks, Zach.
Always
Thank you.
reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.